Half a day and good morning. The Committee on Housing, Utilities, Public Safety, and Homeland Security is calling this public hearing to order. It is now 10:06 a.m. on Thursday, March 22nd, 2018. The purpose of this public hearing is to receive and discuss testimony on Bill number 144-34 as amended by the committee and act to add a new chapter 48 to Division 1 of Title 21 Guam Code annotated relative to establishing the Guam Landlord-Tenant Rental Act of 2017. Notice of this public hearing was provided to senators, stakeholders, and the local media. A 5-day notice was provided on Thursday, March 15, 2018, and 48-hour notice on Monday, March 26, 2018, in accordance with the Open Government Law. The committee will continue to receive written testimony until 5 p.m. on March 30th, 2018. Testimonies may be hand-delivered or mailed to the Guam Congress Building or emailed to Senator T.C. Nelson at guamlegislature.org. I'd like to thank all of those present today, and Ms. Maria Miller, Mr. Chris Murphy, and Mr. Marcel Camacho. If you would like to come forward to the table, please, and go ahead and give written testimony on your position of the bill. Just a little bit backstory. Upon writing this bill, we reached out to as many landlords and tenants that we could. We've held roundtables with various stakeholders. We invited the public. We've also been in contact with many of those that have been concerned about some of the things that we propose on this bill. And so just doing a little historical research, we discovered that the law in place in regards to detainers hasn't been updated within the past 40 years. And this bill is an attempt to address the health and safety of our tenants while ensuring the rights of our landlords. So we really wanted to take an impartial approach to ensure that everyone that is involved is fair and equal across the board. So please feel free to go ahead and give your testimony. We can start with Ms. Miller.
Thank you so much, Senator. Unfortunately, I only got this yesterday, and we did go, I went over it late last night or early this morning. And thank you so much for, everything that we went over with you, your office, is in there. And I went over it, and thank you. And I think it's a great starting point. Our only concern is we basically took everything that you gave us initially and redacted it in a way that, would be acceptable to all of us. But there are some things missing, so there's stuff that for the protection of tenants as well as landlords, I think we also need to address and add in there. And so we would like another opportunity to sit down with you, your office, or Mr. Murphy will probably address something, but I noticed there's things that are missing, like how to deal with abandoned property, the tenant's abandoned property, because the tenant does have some rights on stuff that he may leave, or if they die in the unit, things like that, and that's not addressed in there. Different things, disposition of security deposit is not well addressed either. So we really appreciate where we've gotten so far, and I think it's great, but it's still missing some items. That's my concern.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Miller. We will definitely look into the rights for the abandoned property, because we do know that that's one of the challenges that most especially the landlords face when some of the renters or the lessees just leave, and so really it puts them in a bind on whether they can remove these articles and then refurbish the unit or the home for another rental. So I understand that some of the landlords do have that challenge, and then how they would move around with
yes.
disposition of the security deposit and some of the challenges
exactly.
where they don't pay. So,
and
yes.
Those are the things that I think we need to Because not every landlord is going to be a realtor or have a realtor
Right.
working for them, you know? So in order to protect the tenant too.
Okay.
In cases where, you know, like I would know not to charge for the whole recarpeting of the place if there's just a spot on it. I know how to prorate that, but, you know, things like that.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Havade, good morning, Senator. My name is Chris Murphy. I'm representing the Real Estate Commission, along with Marcel Camacho. I too appreciate the opportunity to provide additional testimony for your consideration. I also believe that we've developed a very strong starting point in updating the Guam landlord-tenant codes. But I feel due to the far-reaching effects that a bill such as this will have on both landlords and tenants alike, that I think we need to, as Maria indicated, continue discussions a little bit more with members of the community, most specifically Guam Board of Realtors, the Real Estate Commission, and possibly some attorneys, to make sure that we arrive at the revision that addresses the major issues that'll most benefit both landlords and tenants alike moving forward. I did in my letter to you indicate some revisions that we recommend based on items such as security deposit, which is a big issue on rental agreements. And also one of the areas that we feel is lacking that's very critical as well as abandoned property is eviction process. Because my experience, and I'm sure both of these individuals have had experience with tenants that maybe have been falsely removed from their, or unfairly removed from their properties, you know, due to landlords that may be a little more aggressive than is reasonable, and vice versa, tenants staying over when they're not entitled to stay over. So I think one of the key elements of any landlord-tenant code is how people handle the eviction process. So by meeting with GAR, the Real Estate Commission attorneys, I think we could discuss that with you and come to, you know, some kind of resolution that's meaningful, so we can address this and some of the other issues that Maria brought up. But other than that, you know, I commend you on taking this. This is a very difficult subject to address, as you've seen, because it's never been changed. And appreciate your efforts and look forward to trying to arrive at a mutually beneficial agreement for landlord and tenants alike. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Yes, no, we've been working together to find a solution to address the current law because of the many gaps that are missing. And thank you for always coming to the table as the Real Estate Commission, you and Mr. Camacho, putting in insight on how we can improve this law, and if we need to take a little longer to make sure that the bill is thorough and it addresses all the concerns. And no, I look forward to meeting with everyone and moving this bill forward so that it is fair and addresses the concerns that you have today.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Camacho.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Marcel Camacho, for the record. And as Chris Murphy advised you, I am the Vice Chairman of the Guam Real Estate Commission, working with the government of Guam. I'm also a member of the Guam Association of Realtors, and so is Chris. So we're here to support also GAR in their efforts to come to a compromise as usual and find the best solution for Guam in the way that we transact real estate here on Guam. It's not our intent to sway this towards the landlord or the tenant, but again, coming to an agreement on what we can reasonably and comfortably feel is right for Guam now and for the future. And I want to thank, I'm assuming that Senator Espaldon is part of your committee. I want to thank the staff and the committee for their hard work and taking on this very challenging task of trying to meet that meeting of the minds, because it hasn't been difficult. We've seen over the years that many have attempted and none has succeeded. So But it is truly important that we have something on the books, especially because the island is growing. We have more activity in the form of real estate because of the movement of the Marine forces to Guam and because of the strong tourism numbers that we're seeing. And as we grow, we don't want to be the Wild West. We want to have good policies and procedures and in place, rules and regulations to guide us in how we can achieve an equitable partnership between the landlord and the tenant. So I commend you again for your efforts and look forward to continuing to work with you because, as Chris said, there are some things that we would like to see in addition to what's included in the bill today. And we're confident that we'll get to that point very shortly. We're not in any rush on this, but we'll take it one bite of the apple at a time, and hopefully that we can eat the whole apple at the end together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate you coming and also bringing your expertise to the table. I'd like to acknowledge Senator Espadon. Thank you for attending today, and then also Mrs. Taitsno and Mr. Duenas and Mr. Leongrau from Goras. Do you have anything that you'd like to provide testimony on Bill number 144, which is the Landlord-Tenant Act? And then I'll open it up to my colleagues if they have any questions.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Senator Espaldon. First off, I want to thank you for incorporating some of our comments on the bill that we provided at the roundtable. We are preparing our written comments, and we hope to submit them by early next week. At this point, we are limiting our review just to look at how it impacts our public housing and Section 8 wait list. Section 8 programs, rather. And also to see if there are any potential impact in terms of fair housing. Right now, from what I recall of the bill, I don't anticipate any problems with respect to our public housing lease agreements. We basically practice some of the things that are spelled out in the bill in terms of our landlord-tenant relations. One of the things that we do have is that we are required by the regulations not to do self-eviction. So if at a time a family refuses to move out, we would basically have to go to the court to get a writ of possession, or pursue a writ of possession, asking the judge to order the family to surrender the premises. That's one of the prohibitions in terms of lease agreements in our public housing that are outlined in the HUD regulations for public housing. Other than that, as I said, we don't see any major issues, but we are going to be looking at the legislation once again in terms of how it impacts our ability to manage our public housing and Section 8 programs.
Thank you very much, Director. Senator Espadon, do you have any questions?
I'm not sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure who to address this to, but since you brought it up, Mr. Duenas, and I'll actually pose it to the realtors, this Guam Association of Realtors, the whole issue of eviction. I know that's kind of been a difficult thing to address because I suppose, as Mr. Duenas mentioned, that when someone has defaulted on their agreement or it's time to move on, that it's really hard to move them out. And I'd like a better understanding of what that process is. You mentioned that even if they've defaulted, Mr. Duenas, then there's a process that you'd have to actually get a court order to get them to move out?
When a family fails to meet their obligations under our lease agreement as a public housing entity. We do give them a 2-week notice to cure or move out. Most families, for the most part, families either cure or they will negotiate, say, a payment agreement, or they will voluntarily move out. Occasionally, the units get abandoned, but for the most part, if a family just basically refuses to move out, we will have to go to Superior Court and request for a writ of possession. That's basically the process we follow.
If I may ask the Realtor Board, does that pose a difficulty to a lot of the landlords also? Is that a high incidence, or is it just kind of like...
Yes, thank you. Yes, and that is why I don't think you were here earlier when Mr. Murphy said those are one of the things that we have to address in here. It's not addressed. So evictions, as well as the abandoned possessions, what to do with those things, those things need to be addressed in a landlord-tenant code because there's no rules or regulations. That's why, again, we would like to meet with him, with the board, the Real Estate Commission, you guys, attorneys, like he said, and come up with a few things that are missing.
On that particular issue, though, are you aware of what other jurisdictions do, perhaps, to make it a little easier for a tenant who should be evicted or should be placed out of the unit, aside from having to go to court?
I'm not sure if I understand your question. Are you saying is there an easier process?
Right.
Right now, the way it works is there's a 5-day notice to quit, as he indicated, and it's a court procedure that's involved with marshals and so forth, and it can get dragged out. It can get, unpopular and things like that. But I'm not sure that there's an easier solution as to this problem, other than making sure that we have the legal parameters in place that make sense in terms of how much time is allotted to the tenant to give them adequate time to be removed, as well as not exceeding an adequate time to the landlord. Because once a tenant stops paying, then the landlord becomes at risk for his mortgage payments, damage to the property. These are all kinds of things that sometimes, if someone's being evicted, they're not the happiest person in town, and they have been known to damage property, to stall and things like that. So we need to make sure, and that's why I suggested that we meet with the attorneys, because the attorneys are the ones that do it for everyone, and get their input in terms of how easy it is, what kind of delays there are in the court system to make sure that this is done on a timely basis, and see if there's any kind of tweaking to that portion of the law that they would, come together and deem reasonable, so that this can be addressed moving forward. But it is an issue, and it's an issue for both the tenant and the landlord, depending on the scenario.
Right.
If I may, Senator.
Please.
I think the answer to your question is yes. We can look at other jurisdictions, Hawaii as an example, or California, and have the attorneys review what they are doing there, and then recommend something that would be, again, equitable to Guam's environment. The federal government, HUD programs run by GURA may have a different standard, but I think if the standard is reasonable, we might, again, look at it and see if we can model the general practice here on Guam after that. But again, we need to be sensitive to the tenant. We don't really want to evict them. We want to work with them. But if it gets to a point where their finances can't catch up or can't afford residing in the unit at the rate that was contracted, then as a landlord, again, we have to protect our interests, we have to protect our asset, we have to protect our cash flow, because it could mean that, you know, the banks are relying on us to pay the mortgage on it also. So again, as you can see, we brought the issue up earlier. We want to continue to work it so that we include provisions for this, and I feel that we can reach a reasonable compromise.
Right, and the reason why I bring it up is because I know of a couple, maybe even more than just two, instances where even after going through the whole process of going through the court system and whatnot, the tenant somehow was able to remain or remained on the property against the landlord's wishes and of course against the court order, just by several different maneuvers that I guess they were so familiar with all the little loopholes of how to stay a lot longer well past their tenancy. And so again, I just wanted to understand it, but I'll look to the chairman and the committee to really try to understand what the best procedure might be to assist the landlords.
Again, in the absence of rules and regulations and statute, they may have that opportunity, but that's what we're here to do today.
Right. To
tighten everything up and to establish the rules, and hopefully everyone will follow the rules from that point forward. So,
okay. You know, I do just a note, and it's probably unrelated to this, but it is related to a degree. It's a tangent. You know, I know going forward, you mentioned, you know, of course, with the military buildup, that we're going to see probably a lot of the rental unit prices go up, and there's a big concern for that. And again, it might be totally unrelated to this bill, but it's something again to think about as we continue discussion on this bill, because we know that last time, or when the military first announced the buildup back in 2008, 2009, right, we saw rentals go up, and to try to, of course, for the landlord to try to take advantage of what the military was providing as a stipend to their members to rent out in the community. But the negative effect of that, which was great for the landlord, but the negative effect of that was the displacement of local families and their inability to meet the higher rental rates. And again, it's one of those things I think as policymakers we have to be conscientious of and perhaps work with the experts in the real estate field to try to understand how we might be able to mitigate that negative effect as we see the process of the buildup unfold before us.
I can assure you, Senator, that as far back as 8 years ago when I was the executive director at GURA, and I hope that I've instilled the same concept into my the new executive director, I went many times to the HUD offices, bringing to the attention that with the movement of the military forces, and even before that, during the construction phase, we're going to see professionals, engineers, architects, planners. We're going to see contractors, project managers, construction managers. We're going to see construction workers all coming on island. And we also have the military here on island that's competing for the units that exist today. And it's all about supply and demand. Unfortunately, you know, we're in a situation right now where the supply is getting short, the demand is getting high, and we haven't been able to add more units into the whole equation because of the lack of labor. So we are headed for a crisis, and that's where GURA and HUD can help. There is going to be a gap between those that can afford and those that cannot. But that's a free market, and it's not for the leaders to impose upon the free market. So we just have to encourage the private sector to respond to the demand and figure out ways to get over the labor issue, the rising construction costs. The rising values of land, again, are based on supply and demand. People want tomorrow's price today because they know that the movement of the Marine forces are coming, and people are going to be looking for land for various types of development. So We don't have the answer, but we encourage you to be proactive in helping, especially with the labor issue, and allowing the private sector to continue to develop more stock. Because once the stock is available and we're not cutting each other's throat competing and raising prices, then the market can stabilize.
Yeah, just to add on to Marcel, my impression is we're heading to a perfect storm. The labor issue is the number one issue that's driving the real estate market right now. The lack of inventory, as he alludes to, the supply and demand issues. We're seeing properties that are being artificially inflated because of that scenario. So we need to get back to the part or a market condition where it stabilizes when the supply equals the demand. Working with the military, there's always a need for that. But I think at the same time, there's a niche out there, and I think there are developers out there that see an opportunity not just to focus on the military, but to focus on the local market, which would include just normal local residents, GURA members, things like that. So I think, as he alludes to, the free spirit of competitive market, I think people will understand that there are niches available, and they'll go into those niches, and then that issue will be adjusted accordingly. But as it is now, with the labor force not there, interest rates are on the rise, values of properties are on the rise, so the average resident is going to very soon be out of the market, just because of those three scenarios are all heading in the same direction. And so the number one issue in my book would be the H2 labor force, figuring out a way that we can get more construction activity going on, and then minimize the supply and demand equation to bring more balance between it. And then there'll be opportunities for both the military housing side as well as the local resident side.
I think Mike Duenas, I don't mean to speak for you, Mike, and you can jump in, but he can attest to the fact that the federal funds coming in to assist those in the very low and moderate income range is diminishing. And if not from HUD, from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who allows or offers loan guarantees or direct loans. Now these federal entities are what help support the local people and those in the middle range and below to compete in this escalating real estate market. So again, be cognizant of that and try to find ways where we can help. And I think Guam Housing Corporation has wonderful opportunities too in subsidizing the down payment through a grant and offering low interest loans for first-time home buyers. So, Mike?
Before we talk about the marketplace in general, in terms of the landlord-tenant relations, there are a couple of hot-button issues for us. One is that some landlords put in their lease agreements a waiver of their right to go to court. That's something that we don't allow in our Section 8 program. The second issue is when a landlord says utilities are included, and then he bills the tenant for excessive consumption. I think we need to have that excess utility consumption defined, because it can get arbitrary. In terms of the housing market, it's as confusing today as it was 10 years ago. Most of what usually drives market demand is new household formation. We saw that the population did not increase as projected when based on the 2000 census. So when the 2010 census came in, the results showed that I believe our population grew by maybe 4,000. That's the equivalent of 1 year of new births or natural increase, excess births over deaths. The question today is what's driving it? There's a lot of short-term demand or short-term things that affect the supply as well as the demand. As Senator Camacho referred to, we're getting a lot of people looking for short-term rentals, 6 months. They're looking for furnished units. They're looking for units that include utilities. These are the professionals that Senator Camacho was referring to, the project managers, engineers are coming in to work on the construction projects. Then the military rental market itself, it's fraught with challenges as much as the dollar amounts seem very attractive. But we have bad tenants in the military market as well, not just in the civilian market. And then we have this tendency to go in groups. So when a new development comes in with all the newest amenities, everybody wants to go, or the military market wants to go in that direction. And the Navy housing market does have provisions for leases to be broken if they are going to TDY or whatever, or if the commander orders them to live on base housing. So even though you have a contract with Navy housing, it doesn't necessarily mean your tenant is going to be there for the length of the contract. Sometimes there are ways to break that contract. So these are short term right now, but investors are really have to get a handle on what our natural increase in rate of new household formation is, because that's really the underlying impetus for driving the demand for housing. Right now, the military housing and all this construction, those will eventually settle down in the next 5 years. I think the question is new household formation, in how many units we're losing to bed and breakfast activities. Those are not individual families making a room available in their house. These are people who are putting out 15, 30 unit complexes for bed and breakfast activities.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
Just for your knowledge, one of the standard forms that we use in the Guam Association of Realtors does leave the option for mediation as opposed to direct court action. And so in contemplating, the direction, again, as Mike mentioned, that their system might be different than what is generally practiced in the private sector. So we might have to, again, look at it and come to a compromise in that respect. Going to court isn't always a solution. It can be very expensive on both sides, and mediation is a step in the direction of trying to resolve it equitably, again. The art of compromise, just like politics. So.
Thank you. Ms. Miller?
Thank you. A couple of things. In the 12 years I've been doing property management, having close to 300 properties, I've only gone to court once. Most of the time, we can resolve things, easily, help the tenant out, get them out as soon as possible to help the landlord out. So we don't have to go to court. As far as the military housing, if it helps any, GAR has been sitting with the housing officers, and they're concerned too about how much is being spent on housing. So they're under, even we met with JAG, somebody from JAG too, with that group, because they're no longer going to be open to accepting or paying $4,400 just because two single guys for $2,200 have moved into a unit, because it doesn't add value to that property, So they're thinking about getting comparable market prices, because to them, somebody's taking advantage of the U.S. government, which I agree, The same house a month ago rented for $2,200, now it's $4,400, so they're looking at those things too. Obviously, the federal government is not happy with how we, the money that they have to pay out here. So we are working with them. We've met twice with them already. It's not an easy solution, because the landlords are expecting those kind of things. As far as the short-term rentals too, that's another thing we need to address in the landlord-tenant code, because we need to know at what point does a short-term rental run into a landlord-tenant, fall into landlord-tenants. At some point they stop being tourists and go into a landlord-tenant relationship. Not everybody falls into a landlord-tenant relationship, and we need to address that in our code. All the properties it's very sad right now. I have nothing to offer to Section 8. It's so sad that hardly anybody has anything to rent to Section 8 people, and until those prices unfortunately come up a little bit more to where the market's at now, it's going to get worse, unfortunately. It's just the way the economy of the territory is going, like Marcel mentioned.
I just wanted to add, though, that, if we can have additional stock on island, what typically happens is people move into the new stock, as Chris kind of alluded to, which leaves the existing stock available for others. And as the inventory grows and catches up to the demand, as Chris mentioned, then that existing stock could be used for those that are in an income category that would meet the landlord's desires at that time, because it becomes a very competitive market and prices drop. So
I appreciate all the comments, and forgive me, Madam Chair, for even bringing it up, because I know it was not really germane to the bill at hand, but I think I just wanted to make sure that the discussion was broadened, because when we start talking about these kind of relationships and the effect the rental market has on our people and the unavailability of housing, then you're right, it does create a perfect storm that we're going to have to address probably sooner better than later. And so this discussion needs to continue, and perhaps even help us try to figure out a way in which we can address the shortages. But you're right, the supply and demand, we understand that, and right now it's very difficult to create the supply because of the labor issue, as well as all the external forces that are also affecting us as well. So again, Madam Chair, I apologize, but I thank you for that time.
Madam Chair, can I just add one more thing before we stop? As a private sector developer, we would like to see a friendlier business environment from the government of Guam. I have gone on economic missions in the past as a member of the governor's cabinet, and some of the questions that were posed after doing presentations were, why does it take 65 signatures in order to get a building permit for a housing subdivision? And these impediments to efficient and affordable homes, development of homes, does play a part in the supply and demand. So if there's truly a commitment to assist the private sector in providing the housing stock, it's got to start with the Land Use Commission, who has to look through every residential subdivision to get a subdivision approval, proper zoning of the land, infrastructure, And I think both of you know that prior to being in the legislature and at GURA, I participated in the development of the master plan for Guam. And we want to look at those planning efforts and encourage development in areas that can reasonably withstand development and discourage developments in areas where we might find it sensitive because of the environment, because of steep slopes, because of wetlands, because of proximity to the ocean and runoff, things of that sort. So I guess my point, getting back to my point, we need a more friendly government review process in order to achieve efficient and quick development in these times where our economy is being challenged with a lack of income. So, thank you.
Can I just say one more thing, since we're piggybacking on sort of related issues with respect to the ability to generate affordable housing for the middle and lower income range that's sorely needed right now. There is just a tremendous opportunity for the government and private developers to partnership. And specifically, I'm referring to Chamorro Land Trust, whereby they come to an arrangement with a developer. The developer goes in as a normal development, only it's for lower end or middle income housing. They foot the bill. They do just like a normal subdivision. They put the infrastructure in, which is the major problem for the government because they can't do it. They build the homes, they sell the homes. And if they can come to some kind of working relationship, because there are some challenges working with Chamorro Land Trust just because of regulations, but if there's some way that some of those obstacles can be addressed, I mean, there's a vast number of Chamorro land lots available, and there's developers who see an opportunity to build those kind of subdivisions as opposed to higher end subdivisions. They still make their profit margins that they feel comfortable with, but at the same time they address the needs which are not being addressed at all in terms of new housing development. So that's just something along the lines when we think about partnershiping and making things easier for developers to access. That would be a tremendous opportunity for both parties. I won't say anything else. Thank you.
Let me
Madam
comment.
Chair.
Okay.
Since we're talking about Chamorro Land Trust, sorry. There is actually a program under U.S. Department of Agriculture called the SUTA, Substantially Underutilized Trust Areas, that provide opportunity for developers to take advantage of low cost or grant money for the infrastructure for these Chamorro Land Trust projects. And again, please take into consideration that we as developers would like to assist in developing affordable housing. And if we can get these programs active with private developers, I think that we can achieve what the objective is, and that's, again, to add more housing stock. But one of the things that is an impediment, again, is a system development charge imposed by the Guam Waterworks Authority. And we have talked about this year after year after year after year after year, and I haven't heard that they have utilized the money that has been accumulating in that account for umpteen years. The amount has grown in excess of $14 million from what I understand. And maybe I haven't kept up with it. Maybe they have actually used some of that money, but we've got to find a better way to lower the cost of development, especially, for those that need it the most, those in the mid to very low income range. And that system development charge is a whopping $5,600 per house, just for the connection to the water. Thank you.
In terms of the Chamorro Land Trust, 20 years ago, Senator Marcel Camacho was working for Dueñas and Associates, and we had engaged him to do a feasibility study of several projects, of areas that we owned. We also asked him to look at the potential number of houses that could be built on the Chamorro Land Trust. Back then in '98, the land trust, the court just came out a year or two before that, saying it has to be implemented. Our consultants then estimated that the Chamorro Land Trust holdings could potentially yield over 7,000 housing units. So it's very important that we figure out a way to unlock that resource. And the tools are out there. Senator Camacho referred to the SUDA under USDA. Mr. Murphy referred to private partnerships with the government. The tools are out there. What is stopping us is the emotional baggage that we assign, that our families bring when it comes to talking about the land trust. Sooner or later, we have to move beyond this lack of trust or confidence in the ability of the Chamorro Land Trust to develop these properties. That has really been the biggest impediment for developing the Chamorro Land Trust, is the attitudes of the stakeholders and the political will of our elected officials to move forward.
I hope Senator Ada is listening.
Thank you very much, Senator Camacho. Senator Espadon, do you have anything that you'd like to say?
No, I just want to thank you again for allowing me to broaden the discussion just a little bit past what the bill is. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and I'm very grateful for Senator Espadon's probing, because this is very essential, especially in the years ahead with the impacts to the government agencies. So I'd like to continue to see what we can do to make our government more efficient in that aspect of development. Senator Camacho, you mentioned 65 signatures for affordable housing units, and you're right, that's an awful lot of bureaucracy to go through. And so, no, if we could find solutions to streamline these things and make it more productive, then let's do so. So I'd like to hold in the future a roundtable to address the streamlining of the government as far as development is concerned, to make it more government and business cooperative, no? And then also to address the housing impacts that Senator Espadon brought up with the potential increase in market because of the military buildup. In regards to the Chamorro Land Trust, in the beginning we put out a bill to delay the return of land from the Land for the Landless program. And in this process, we discovered that the infrastructure and the development plan for the Land for the Landless lots that were given were not thought out very clearly. So some Land for the Landless recipients received land that was in a swamp area, so it was difficult for them to build. Many of them received land that was far away from infrastructure, and so since they don't have the money to develop that land, it became more of a discouragement for them, or a hindrance for them to build a complete home. So they would have to, some of them live in tin homes, and that's all they could afford. And so we have been looking into SUDA and the Chamorro Land Trust lands to see what we could do for affordable homes and how the government can cooperate with USDA and SUDA for that. There is a little bit of challenges that we did come into, so we are looking in a legal perspective on what are the parameters that we can negotiate these terms with developers within the Chamorro Land Trust program. As far as the system development charge, I've been always questioning GWA and PUC about this charge. Just recently we had an informational hearing, and now they have improved their rules and regulations. They do have plans capital improvement projects and other projects that will help and address the water loss issues that GWA is experiencing, and also to improve the water quality. So they are looking, they have been already addressing and preparing proposals to spend the system development charge. But it's always good to see if we can negotiate again the cost of the SDC for those who'd like to build a home or develop. As far as the bill is concerned, the one that we came here to talk about, we've been working with all of you, and thank you for your expertise in providing us a lot of guidance. We have looked at the California code, and a lot of historically Guam real estate law or the landlord-tenant law is really based off the California code, but has not been updated since. And so, discussing the legalities of it, we have sought assistance from outside attorneys to ensure that if anything should happen and we do go to court, that the law is actually binding and whole, so there's no question put forth. I'd like to thank the Guam Real Estate Commission for putting in their letter of how we could improve this bill. We've been working with each other for about a year, and so thank you now for this. But I'd like to also see if we can meet one more time before we move forward with the bill and amend it to ensure that's impartial and address the eviction process, the disposition of their security deposits, and now we discovered short-term leases. And so perhaps within the next month we can come together and meet again so that we can make sure that the bill is impartial, fair, and accurate in accordance with the law. Okay. Thank you all of you for being here and your continued efforts and to serve our community. Have a good day.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. It is now 10:58 a.m. The Committee on Housing, Utilities, and Public Safety calls this public hearing adjourned. Have a good day.